Emily had been looking forward to this weekend for weeks, a chance to escape the city noise and find quiet in the remote woods near her hometown. The cabin she rented sat deep in the forest, miles from the nearest neighbor or cell phone signal. As she pulled up the gravel driveway, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows through the bare trees. The cabin was small and weathered, built from dark timber that had aged unevenly in the harsh seasons. Around it, tall pines stood close, their branches scraping the cold wind that carried the sharp scent of damp earth. Emily stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking under her boots. She lit a fire in the stone hearth, the warm glow pushing back the deepening dusk. Outside, the forest was alive with faint sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the snap of a twig. Alone in the cabin, those noises felt magnified, pressing in from every direction. Emily settled by the window with a book, but her eyes kept drifting to the dark woods. Then something caught her attention, a faint sound, a soft scrape just beyond the glass. A cold draft slipped in through a crack where the window frame had warped, and the curtain fluttered as if brushed by an invisible hand. Emily pulled it shut and checked the latch. But despite the silence settling again, she felt uneasy, as though something was watching her from the dark, just outside her line of sight. She told herself it was only the wind, the loneliness playing tricks on her mind. Still, the feeling stayed, a quiet weight in the air she couldn't shake as night wrapped itself tighter around the cabin. Emily's sleep was restless. Every creak of the old cabin made her flinch. Then, just as she was drifting off, she heard it, a whisper. Soft, barely there, but persistent. She sat up, straining to listen. The voices seemed to circle outside, carried on the night air. They weren't words she could understand, just a breathy murmur slipping in and out of the wind. At first, she tried to convince herself it was nothing, just the forest sounds blending together. But when morning came, she found footprints in the fresh snow around the cabin, small and uneven, like someone had paced back and forth near the walls. But Emily hadn't seen a single person, and the nearest road was miles away. Inside, things began to shift. The power flickered, plunging the cabin into darkness for brief moments. Then, when the lights returned, the front door was cracked open, even though Emily was sure she'd locked it tight before bed. And then she saw them, strange symbols carved deep into the wooden doorframe. Rough scratches, raw and jagged, unlike anything she'd seen before. Her fingers trembled as she traced the marks, a cold shiver running through her. The whispering rose again, louder now, swirling just beyond the walls as if something unseen was closing in. Emily was alone, but the night said otherwise. As the night deepened, the whispering no longer hovered at the edge of hearing. It grew louder, sharper, more insistent. The murmur evolved into a steady chant, a stream of syllables Emily could not understand, but that seemed to fill the air around her, sinking deep into her chest. It was as if the walls themselves breathed the sounds, folding the language into every creak of the floorboards, every gust of the cold wind outside. Emily's skin prickled. She pressed her back against the door, eyes darting toward the faint porch light that barely cut through the thick darkness outside. Then, without warning, the front door slammed open with a force that shook the cabin's frame, the cold night air flooding inside like a sudden wave. Emily's heart jumped. There, just beyond the reach of the porch light, a figure stood, tall, unmoving, swallowed by shadows so deep its shape was nearly impossible to make out. She blinked, but it did not move or speak. The only sound was the rising chant in the air, weaving itself into a chorus of low voices that seemed to come from every direction. Panic surged through her veins. She grabbed her coat and bolted out the door, stumbling into the snow-covered forest. But the woods were no longer the familiar place she had arrived in. Trees twisted into unnatural shapes, their branches stretching like fingers, blocking paths she thought she knew. No matter which way she turned, the darkness pressed closer. Behind her, the figure moved silently, its footsteps soft on the snow yet unnervingly close. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps. She ran without direction, desperation clawing at her chest. The whispers followed, never letting her forget that she was no longer alone, and that whatever it was, it would not let her go. Morning light found Emily lying just beyond the edge of the forest, face pressed into the cold snow, her breath shallow and uneven. Her memory of the night was fractured, a haze of shadows and sounds, of running and the endless cold. How she had escaped, she did not know. With help, she returned to the cabin, hoping for answers, for something solid to grasp onto. But the cabin was empty, silent, empty as if no one had lived there for years. The strange symbols she had seen on the doorframe were gone, erased as if swallowed by the wood itself. The footprints in the snow had vanished, leaving no trace of passage. The only thing left was a carving on the back wall of the cabin, deep and fresh, etched into the timber with jagged lines that cut through the grain. Leave before the whisper finds you. Emily never returned to the woods. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, she hears the soft murmur of voices carried on the wind. Reminders that some places are meant to be left alone, and some whispers are warnings you cannot ignore. It was well past midnight when James, a taxi driver with years of experience navigating the quiet streets of his small town, pulled over to the side of a deserted road. The town had gone to sleep hours ago. Streetlights flickered weakly, casting long shadows across empty sidewalks and shuttered storefronts. The air was thick with stillness, so complete it almost felt like a weight pressing down inside the car. James's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the lone figure standing by the roadside. A man wrapped tightly in a worn coat, face half hidden beneath a hood. He moved toward the taxi without a word, his steps slow and deliberate. James didn't ask questions. At this hour, few were on the roads, and the rules were simple. Get the passenger where they needed to go, no matter how strange or silent. Inside the car, a heavy quiet settled between them. James glanced in the rearview mirror and caught the passenger's pale eyes briefly meeting his. Empty, unreadable. He tried to make conversation, asking where he was headed, but the answers were vague, almost rehearsed. The man's voice was low, almost a whisper, carrying none of the urgency or familiarity one might expect on a late-night ride. The destination given was somewhere far outside the town limits, a place James barely recognized. A spot at the edge of the map where the streetlights faded into darkness and the roads gave way to open fields and dense woods. The passenger said no more, staring straight ahead as if already a part of the night itself. The car pulled back onto the road, tires humming softly on the asphalt. Outside, the world was empty and quiet, but inside the taxi, an invisible tension grew, thick and cold, like the feeling of being watched, even though they were alone. James shifted uneasily in his seat, the road stretching ahead into the unknown. As the taxi moved further away from the faint glow of town lights, the silence inside the car grew heavier, almost suffocating. James glanced at the rearview mirror again, but the passenger remained still, his face blank, eyes fixed forward like a statue carved from shadows. The streetlights thinned out, replaced by darkness so complete that the road ahead seemed swallowed whole. The radio, which had been playing quietly, suddenly cut to static, crackling with sharp bursts of white noise that made James's skin crawl. He reached to turn it off, but before he could, the radio snapped back on for a moment, then cut out again. A chill swept through the car, cold and unwelcome, like the breath of something unseen. James tried to break the silence. "Almost there," he said, forcing his voice to sound steady. The passenger didn't respond, only shifted slightly, as if acknowledging the words without really hearing them. Then the streetlights vanished completely. The road was swallowed by darkness, trees pressing close on either side, their branches reaching in like grasping fingers. James's hands tightened on the steering wheel as a quiet sound rose up behind him. A soft scraping, barely audible, but unmistakably there. He glanced in the mirror again. The passenger's face was still expressionless, but James thought he saw something, movement, just a flicker, in the shadows behind the glass. The car's dashboard lights flickered, then died, plunging the interior into near darkness. Only the faint glow of the passenger's pale face remained visible. The whispering returned soft, distant at first, then growing closer, threading through the air like cold wind through the trees. James's heart hammered as the radio burst back to life, playing a voice, his own, echoed in a slow, distorted loop. The words were his panic, his fear, his breath caught in the moment, trapped in a sound that was not entirely his own. And when they reached the end of the road, the edge of the map, the place where the town's lights faded, the passenger finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "Here," he said. Then he was gone. James slammed on the brakes, heart racing as he reached the destination, a small, abandoned roadside clearing cloaked in darkness. The headlights barely pierced the blackness beyond the cracked pavement. He turned his head to speak, but the passenger was gone, vanished without a trace. Confused and frozen, James looked around the empty seat, the space cold and still. A sudden chill swept through the car as if the warmth had been stolen. Outside, the silence was deeper, heavier, suffocating. Then, from just beyond the weak glow of the porch light on an old, crumbling signpost. James saw a shadowy figure standing still, unmoving. Its outline blurred into the night, but something about its presence felt wrong, unnatural. The air thickened, and James realized the figure was watching him. No blink, no movement, just eyes fixed, unyielding. He reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The locks refused to respond. Panic flooded him as the whispering voices returned, growing louder, threading through the car like cold fingers. James pounded the door, begging for it to open, but the figure outside remained, silent and patient. The world outside seemed to twist, the trees bending in impossible ways, the road curling back on itself, trapping him in this place with the unseen, with the passenger who never was, and with the darkness that would not let go. When James finally managed to unlock the door and step out, the figure was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. The night air was cold and still, but an unsettling quiet hung heavier than before. The clearing was empty, except for an old, rusted sign that bore a faded name. A name James had heard before but never expected to see. That name belonged to a man who had died in a car accident on this very stretch of road years earlier. A man who had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but rumors and unanswered questions. Shaken, James returned to his taxi. The meter showed a fare of 0. No record of the passenger remained in his logs. The radio, which had been silent, now crackled again, this time replaying his own panicked breaths, stretched and warped, as if caught in a loop that would never end. From that night on, James never took another ride after midnight. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, he swears he can still hear the faint whisper of a voice calling from the dark roads beyond the town, waiting for its next passenger. Michael had just moved into the building, a faded, old apartment complex on the edge of the city, where time seemed to have slowed and forgotten the years. The bricks were worn, stained with decades of rain, and the windows rattled softly in the cold breeze. The kind of place where every sound echoed down the hallways, twisting familiar noises into something strange. The landlord was a quiet man, almost nervous when Michael asked about the basement door at the end of the hall. He brushed it off, saying it was just an old storage room, long unused and locked for as long as anyone could remember. Oddly, no one had a key, and the landlord rarely mentioned it. Michael noticed the atmosphere changed near that door. The hallway lights flickered unevenly, casting long, shaking shadows across peeling paint and cracked tiles. Pipes groaned somewhere deep in the walls, releasing bursts of cold air that whispered through the narrow corridor. And standing there by the locked door was a persistent chill, an unnatural coldness that seemed to press against the skin and seep into the bones. The other residents avoided the basement altogether, their hurried footsteps growing quieter as they passed by the spot. Some whispered about strange noises, soft crying, muffled laughter, footsteps that didn't belong. But no one dared to stay long enough to investigate. Michael, curious and tired from moving, found himself drawn to the door night after night, the cold spot growing heavier with each passing hour. He would pause, listening to the silence that was never truly silent. A silence thick with something waiting, something hidden just beyond the locked threshold. It was a silence that promised secrets, and something more. Nights in the apartment grew heavier for Michael. The moment the building settled into silence, sounds would begin, soft, distant at first, then growing clearer in the stillness. From beyond that locked door in the basement came the faintest hints of crying, low and broken, like a child lost in a forgotten place. The sound was muffled but persistent, seeping up through the floorboards like a secret trying desperately to be heard. Michael found himself drawn to the basement more and more, curiosity gnawing at him despite a growing sense of dread. One evening, after the others had gone quiet, he pressed his ear to the door and caught whispers tangled in the darkness. Voices too faint to make out, but desperate and pleading. When he tried the handle, it refused to budge. The lock held fast, cold metal unmoved. But the feeling beyond the door was undeniable. A cold spot lingered, heavier now, a shadow pressing just beyond the threshold. The air seemed thicker, colder, almost as if something breathed just on the other side, watching, waiting. Days later, fueled by a restless urge he could no longer resist, Michael found a loose key hidden behind a cracked tile near the basement stairs. Forgotten, misplaced, or left deliberately. With trembling hands, he slid it into the lock. It turned with a jarring click that echoed through the silent hallway. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a room bathed in darkness and dust. The floor was littered with old children's toys, broken dolls, rusted tricycles, and scattered wooden blocks faded with time. Faded photographs hung crookedly on the walls, their faces blurred and worn, but unmistakably those of children. As Michael stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply. Shadows shifted in the corners, thin and twisting like smoke, moving just beyond the reach of his flashlight's beam. Then came the sounds again, soft sobbing, the rustle of tiny footsteps, and a quiet lullaby that seemed to drift through the stale air. The room was empty, yet it was alive. Michael barely had time to process the chilling cold that rushed in the moment the door creaked fully open. The air inside the room was thick with dust and something else, something old, heavy, and unspoken. As he stepped cautiously across the creaking floorboards, the shadows around him seemed to stretch and pulse, flickering just beyond the faint circle of light from his flashlight. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut behind him with a force that rattled the walls, plunging the room into near-total darkness. Panic surged in his chest as he reached blindly for the handle, locked tight. His breath came fast and shallow. The silence was shattered by a low, desperate crying that echoed from the corners of the room, a sound so sorrowful it seemed to weigh down the very air. In the flicker of his flashlight, ghostly shapes began to emerge, thin figures, pale and wavering, like children trapped between worlds. Their eyes held stories of loss and fear, their faces blurred but filled with silent pleas. The toys scattered on the floor seemed to shift slightly, as if brushed by unseen hands. A sudden movement caught Michael's eye, a shadow darting just beyond the beam. He turned quickly, heart pounding, but found nothing but the cold, empty darkness pressing in. Then came the touch, a cold hand brushing his wrist, fleeting but unmistakable. Michael froze, every instinct screaming to flee, but the room seemed to close around him, heavy and unyielding. The crying grew louder, now accompanied by faint whispers, names spoken softly, over and over. Trapped in that forgotten room, with the door locked tight and no one to call for help, Michael faced a truth too terrible to deny. The children had never left, and they were not willing to let him go. The next morning, the landlord found the basement door wide open, creaking softly on its hinges. But Michael was nowhere to be found. His belongings lay scattered in the apartment above, untouched. Only the faint scent of cold, damp air lingered, drifting up from the forgotten room below. The faded photographs on the walls of that basement room now bore something new. Fresh handprints, smeared and chillingly real, as if someone or something had pressed their palms against the worn paper, desperate to be seen. Neighbors whispered of strange noises in the building after dark, soft laughter and the distant echo of children's footsteps. But when anyone tried to investigate, the sounds would vanish, leaving behind only silence and a cold spot near that locked door. Michael's disappearance became one of the building's unsolved mysteries, a warning whispered among residents. Some say, if you listen closely near the basement door, you can still hear the crying and the soft lullaby, reminders that some rooms hold more than forgotten memories, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. What would you do if you found yourself completely alone in a place like this, surrounded by darkness, the silence broken only by whispers you cannot understand? Would you run, heart pounding, desperate to escape the unseen? Or would you hide, hoping the shadows pass you by unnoticed? Or would you stand your ground and face whatever waits just beyond the edge of the light? There are no easy answers. Some things in the night refuse to be ignored. I want to hear from you. Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Share your fears, your theories, or even your own experiences with the unknown. And if you want to dive deeper into the world of true horror, real stories that chill the bone and linger long after the lights go out, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because the night is full of stories waiting to be told.